Hello and welcome. I'm Trisha Edwards, Deputy Director of Smithsonian Affiliations, and I'm so glad to have you all with us today. We're pleased to welcome you to our program, A Legacy of Healing, Rebirth, and Leadership. Our discussion today will focus on activism and finding joy after the destruction of trauma, resilience in response to oppression, and ways this has been observed throughout history in Asian American communities. I know this is going to be interesting, thought-provoking, and inspiring. Before we get started, we have just a few housekeeping items. This program is being recorded. The link will be posted on the Smithsonian Affiliations YouTube page in the coming days, and we will also send the link of the recording to everyone who registered. If you have comments, please use the chat box. I'm so glad to see that there's already good conversation, and it's wonderful to see all the different places you're joining us from. Make sure that you're sending your comments to all panelists and attendees. That way everyone can see your comments. If you have questions for our presenters throughout the program, please enter those in the Q&A box, and our staff will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A. And please note that while on-topic discussion is encouraged, we ask that you express yourself in a civil manner and treat others with respect. The Smithsonian monitors comments and may remove participants from the program in accordance with its terms of use. And a link to the Smithsonian's terms will be posted in the chat for your reference. Closed captioning is available. Just click the closed caption button on your screen and captions will appear. If you have a technical issue or a question unrelated to today's discussion, please use the raise your hand feature or type it in the chat box and a Smithsonian staff member will assist you. At Smithsonian Affiliations, we partner with museums and cultural organizations across the country to support them and their communities, people like all of you joining us today, while also furthering the Smithsonian's mission, the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Like the Smithsonian, our affiliate partners are committed to education and public service and work in collaboration with the Smithsonian to catalyze critical conversations in their communities and help us all better understand the world around us. This work seems more important now than ever before as we, like all of you, grapple with so many big issues, including the effects of a global pandemic, political divisiveness, and racial injustice. Today's program is a great example of the ways in which the Smithsonian and our affiliates work together to bring thought-provoking and relevant content to audiences like you. With the help of affiliate organizations from North Carolina to Washington State, Indiana to California, and Texas to Hawaii, we were able to bring this program to many more people than we could with a single in-person event. And I think perhaps most exciting to us is that we're able to start a conversation not with one community, but across many, which we're already seeing in the chat. Affiliations is pleased to host today's program in collaboration with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. Since it began in 1997, the vision of the Asian Pacific American Center has been to enrich the American story with the voices of Asian Pacific Americans. The center is a museum without walls that brings history, art, and culture to their audiences through innovative, community-focused experiences. We are also proud to collaborate with two affiliate museums, the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles and the Winglet Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience in Seattle. We're so grateful for their partnership in conceiving, developing, and of course, presenting this program today. Now I am pleased to introduce our speakers. We have three speakers with us for today's program. Our moderator today is Adriel Lewis. As the Curator of Digital and Emerging Practice at the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, Adriel focuses on how human and ecological culture are informed by the adoption and evolution of technology and digital space. He is especially interested in how the internet contributes to the development of arts practice, social movements, transnational identities, media representation, and global racial dynamics. At the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, Adriel is dedicated to widening the discourse on communities that have long been marginalized in the field of Asian Pacific American studies, including LGBTQ, Pacific Islander, Central Asian, transnational, and refugee communities. Dr. Emily Anderson is a curator at the Japanese American National Museum. She is the author of Christianity in Modern Japan, Empire for God, and the editor of Belief and Practice in Imperial Japan and Colonial Korea, as well as articles and book chapters on religion and imperialism in Japan and the Pacific. She has worked on several exhibitions at the Japanese American National Museum, including the core exhibition, Common Ground, the Heart of Community. Among Dr. Anderson's current projects is co-curating the upcoming exhibition, Sutra and Bible, Faith in Japanese American World War II Incarceration, scheduled to open at the museum in 2022. And our third speaker, speaker is Jessica Rubenacker. Jessica is second generation Filipino American, born in Chicago and raised in the flatlands of central Illinois. She is currently the exhibit director for the Winglet Museum, where she provides leadership and oversight of the community-based exhibition development process. Jessica returned to the museum after managing the City of Redmond's arts program. Jessica also serves on the Washington Museum Association Board and Historic South Downtown Board. She holds an MA in museology from the University of Washington and a BFA in both painting and art history from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which I'll note is another Smithsonian affiliate. Now I am pleased to turn the program over to Adriel.
Hello, everybody. Hey, how are you all doing? It's so exciting to see people tuning in from all throughout, not just the United States, also tuning in from Canada. I see folks tuning in from all over, so I really appreciate this. I feel like Zooms are always a little bit kind of awkward because of the inability to hear each other. And so one of the things that has worked for me is just like really quickly dropping ones into the chat, like as like a, I hear you, or like I'm responding, but emojis take too many keys to press, right? So it would just be like 1, 1, 1, 1, sort of like as like an applause sort of a thing. So we could try, yeah, exactly. Let's try it out. Like if you're here, if you're excited to learn about healing and rebirth and all that great stuff, drop some ones in the chat. Boom, see, it already feels so much more intimate. Beautiful, beautiful. Ah, that makes me feel good. Hi, my name is Adriel Lewis. I am a curator at the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. I'm currently located in the eastern part of LA over in San Bernardino Regional Park. This is Tongfa and Yuhavayatam land. And wanted to, before going into the things I will talk about, just really pay homage to the fact that as all of us are sheltering in place, what is the underlying history, the deep history that affords us to be able to shelter in the particular spaces that we're in. For me, as a child of immigrants, as someone who works at a government organization at the Smithsonian, which is in Washington, D.C., situated in Piscataway lands, I'm constantly being reminded that as scholars of history, of culture, of community, that we do so at the expense of people being displaced from their land, of the labor of enslaved people, and also the continued exploitation of people today. And so in addition to the land acknowledgements, one thing I've also been thinking about lately is what a digital acknowledgement means, whose labor and whose resources afford us to even join online from the comfort of our homes. I'm thinking about the fact that just recently a news report was released that that free labor was being used to build the most recent iPhones that are shipping out right now. And so as we continue to use the internet, use these electronic devices, I want us to also be mindful of whose hands have been behind that for us to have these conversations about what it means to evolve community. So paying homage to everybody who has put in their effort, put in their time and their energy to allow for us to have this space today. I guess with that said, I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are as the Asian Pacific American Center. Drop some ones if you have never heard of the APA Center before and this is your first time attending any of our events. Oh, hello, hello, welcome, welcome. So yeah, as Trisha said, we are a museum without walls, which I think in the beginning, being surrounded by so many beautiful museums at the Smithsonian, I have to admit, when I first joined, I saw that as an obstacle and as something that was sort of holding back the things that we actually wanted to do. But over time, I've really learned to embrace and see the beauty behind us not being a traditional conventional museum. It's really allowed us to think about in innovative and experimental ways what it means to do projects online, what it means to respond quickly, and also what it means to work with people and communities and locations not only throughout the United States, but also throughout the world. And the project that I want to share with you today is the Smithsonian Care Package. Some of you may have seen it before, and if not, all good because it's online and we have it up for the foreseeable future. But just before I really start sharing what the care package is, I wanted to share a little bit about what led me to thinking about curating this care package and how that speaks to the general work of the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. So this care package was launched, I would say in early April. So just a couple of weeks after COVID-19 was declared a pandemic and places all throughout the country, including over in California where I'm at, went on lockdown. And during this time, and the narrative, of course, that continues, was one that COVID was the fault of China, Chinese people, Asian people in general, and two, that that there were either narratives around fear or pity when it came to Asians, not just in the United States, but throughout the country. So on one end, there is this very real pandemic from a disease standpoint to be concerned about, but also for Asian Americans in particular, but also Asian folks in Europe, Asian folks in Africa, even Asian folks in Asia were facing various points of energy in which it was we were finding ourselves in situations where we either had to defend ourselves or claim that we aren't something or another. One thing that I really felt was in need was for us to see a narrative of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders from a standpoint of care as opposed to fear and pity. And looking into the many traditions of our cultures that we've taken with us as immigrants and that we continue to preserve in many different places. And how could we share that? Looking at the body of work that the APA Center had done, we found a number of different meditations, healing arts, workshops, visual arts that spoke to healing and somatics. And so this really allowed us to kind of steer the energy of what it means to think about Asian people and Pacific Islanders during this time. So with that said, I'll just share a little bit about this care package. I'll do my share screen real quick. Yeah, how many of y'all have had a chance to check this out before? And cool, well, there's a few of you, I appreciate it. And for those of you, like I said, if you haven't had a chance, I'm just gonna kind of gloss through this a little bit. But the idea around the care package was to really demonstrate that not only during the time of COVID, but for millennia prior, people in our communities, people who identify as Asian and Pacific Islander have been creating things to care for one another, to care for their communities. And these were actually works that were not created specifically during this moment. These are works that were created over the years in collaboration with artists that APAC had collaborated with. So for example, this guided meditation video by Yumi Sakagawa and Chad Shimura really allowed folks to open up into this exhibition with an opportunity to sit, watch some slow moving visuals, Um, we have a short film called After Earth, directed by Jess X. Snow, that's been to a number of film festivals, but this really allowed us an opportunity to screen the film for the first time. Um, we have a poem by Shamali Ali Naeem with KSR in the background doing music. And so through all of this, we had over a dozen projects. I won't necessarily scroll through every single one. For those of you who tuned in a little bit earlier, you heard music by Lowleaf and Alex Abalos, who did this project called Photosynth. And so what you heard was a combination of harps, crystal bowls, and believe it or not, auxiliary cords that were plugged into different plants and vegetables. And so sort of what was distorting the tones of the crystal bowls and the harps were the frequencies emitted by those plants. So yeah, like you know, for those of you who are interested in checking it out, you can go to smithsonianapa.org/care. But what I really wanted to spend the last couple of minutes talking about was not necessarily just kind of showing off this exhibition, but really talking about what the intention was behind it. Again, thinking about how with COVID-19, one of the biggest concerns is around the fact that it's so contagious. And similarly, fear is something that can be very contagious, right? And so very recently during current times, we've been hearing a lot of narratives that are meant to stoke fear or pity towards not just Asian Americans, but people of color, folks who have been marginalized by society in various ways. But care can also be contagious as well. And so the idea around the care package was, could we create something that might inspire other people to also respond to the things that they're seeing in the news in a way that's healing, in a way that's inspiring. And thankfully it worked out. And so just to share a couple of different projects that came out inspired by the care package. One is Mural Project. Wing on Woe is a Chinatown, New York based storefront/organization. It's based out of one of the oldest general stores in Chinatown, New York. And so they put together a care package called Care as Community Medicine. And I definitely encourage you to check this out as well. My colleague, Andrea Kim Neighbors, who is the manager of education initiatives, may be able to help with the links. And so these are also some incredible pieces of artwork. There's some great talks. There's actually a Tai Chi warm-ups video that I've incorporated into my daily routine as my own kind of personal care pattern. And this other exhibition that was put on by a group of artists called Same Pulse, who first saw the Smithsonian APA care package and were inspired to reach out to the folks within their own communities to develop a collection of work as well. So I definitely encourage you, along with the Smithsonian APA care package, to also check these ones out as well. The Smithsonian APA care package is just one of a number of different projects that we're working on. The next project that I am developing sort of in the same vein is called Brave Space, and it will be an audio-based collection of music, sound works, guided meditations. And we're really thinking about releasing that maybe in about half a year. And that will be more of a collection of works that are coming in response to this time right now. So yeah, I guess with that said, I'm so excited to hear about these other incredible organizations that I've long admired as a part of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, Winglet and Japanese American National Museum. And I will pass it on to Dr. Emily Anderson, who is a curator at the Japanese American National Museum.
Hi. Hi, everybody, and thank you for including us in this event. My name is Emily Anderson, and I am with the Japanese American National Museum, but I'm actually coming to you from San Diego, which is on Kumeyaay land. As you know, we're all entering a new sort of the never-ending yet never-endingly new series of uncertainty and vulnerability and difficulty. This presentation, I think, ties in really well with the last one, because these questions about care, how do you care for yourself and for each other in a time of difficulty, in a time of fear, and also the question of fear itself being something that can be contagious and can lead to new kinds of reproach and attack and hostility, just like we've seen in the API community, how the fact that that COVID-19 is associated with China has led to sort of the latest wave of anti-Asian sentiment in this country, which of course, as we know, is not a new thing. It's just the latest version of that. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to quickly share my screen. Shoot. And of course, hold on. Stop share, pull up. No matter how many times you do this, it's always weirdly more difficult. So there we go. Okay. So this particular program today, A Legacy of Healing, Rebirth, and Leadership, works really well with an exhibit that I've been working on for the last few months, which will, fingers crossed, all things, as long as all things go well, will open next year in 2021 in October. It is a project that I'm co-curating with Duncan Williams of the Senzo Ito Center at USC. He is many of you are probably aware of his really important book on Buddhism in the American camps that came out last year. But he and I will be co-curating this project, and USC and JANM will be sort of co-sponsoring the project as well. And I wanted to take this opportunity to sort of share the story of one community's experience of dislocation, the search for belonging, through resilience and through locating new anchors and new lives, and how this process is repeated as a result of the spread of fear and uncertainty and hostility in the past. So this is very much a history story, but I think that the things that we're going through now really resonate deeply with this story as well. So I'm going to try to stick to time so that it is very hard for a historian to be brief, but I will do my best. So thanks. Now, the story I'm going to tell is one about Japanese immigrants to the United States, and specifically through the lens of religion. So this might be surprising to a lot of people, but Japanese immigrants, when they came over, were already religious, and in multiple ways. This is a group of Japanese Congregationalists. So these are Japanese Christians who were greeting a Japanese minister who came over from Japan already in 1915. And of course, there are other Japanese immigrants who converted to Christianity once they arrived here, but Christianity was not foreign to them before coming. But in addition to Christianity, of course, you have the importance of Buddhist churches. This is one in Seattle. And, I didn't necessarily try to do a lot of sort of Pacific Northwest. I just happened to, but this is my personal shout out to Winglet and all the folks representing from Washington, Oregon, and elsewhere. So not only did we have Japanese religious institutions being built very quickly to serve the important religious needs of Japanese Americans, Japanese immigrants in the cities, like in places like LA or in Seattle, but we even have places like Wapato, Washington, which Yakima Valley, shout out to Yakima Valley, also had its own, not only Buddhist church, but Yakima Valley next door had a Christian church quite early on as well. And once the immigrants began to develop sort of roots and really sort of came to the conclusion that the United States would not just be a place of sojourning, it would not just be a place of finding new resources, but would really be a new home for them. They started to develop families meaning getting married, having children, and these churches also expanded the scope of activities to really serve the needs of not just the immigrant generation, but the younger generation. So and here we have Tacoma, we started to see as children grew up and, churches served the needs like Sunday schools, of language schools, of providing social outlets for parents and children. They also became an important place of establishing a sense of identity, a sense of awareness of who they were, and also providing a real spiritual underpinning for what their purpose in life was. It gave them a sense of purpose, it gave them a sense of belonging, it gave them a real anchor in this world. And these were really important to a developing immigrant community. You see even here, this is a procession of the Seattle Buddhist Church going through the streets. These are chigo, who are young children who play a ceremonial role. You have a ceremonial altar. So all of these things help to give a sense of community for Japanese immigrants and their families. And it really, the linking of religious belief, religious practices, religious traditions really helped to give these immigrants a sense of place and a sense of belonging in a new world that was often hostile, but nonetheless was a new home. Well, as we all know, that did not, bad things happen. So World War II begins, Pearl Harbor is attacked, and we don't have time today to go through all of the twists and turns of Japanese Americans being rounded up by the FBI, and then the Executive Order 9066 being issued to the exclusion orders being passed. We're gonna fast forward now to the incarceration camps, of both the WRA camps as well as the Justice Department camps. And of course, the reason why Japanese Americans ended up in these places was because of the contagion of fear. Fear and also, outright prejudice, that people were afraid that these people who, just by virtue of where they came from or how they looked, might be an enemy, might be potential subversives, and did not deserve to have the benefits of due process, of civil liberties, but that it was better to round everybody up and throw them in behind barbed wire to ask questions later, rather than to actually afford them the ability to actually defend themselves and to even be investigated to see whether or not there were any charges. And as it turns out, there were not. But at the time in 1942, those questions were not asked. They were basically very quickly done away with by claims of the needs for national security. And even though the real reason was the contagion of fear, that fear of these people was considered evidence enough of their complicity. But nonetheless, that's what led to this. And this raises a question that I think is a question that we've all been challenged with. Certainly, I mean, quite frankly, most of our lives, and it's been a more important one more recently, is when in a time of fear, who are the ones who support and defend the vulnerable, the weak, the unpopular? And at this time, the answer was there really was not very many. There were no people who did that. But once again, communities, rather than just sort of again, ending up in a state of self-pity or despair, sought means for resilience, sought means of rebuilding a sense of community. And again, religious institutions served a really important role for that. So this is the United Christian Church in Tule Lake in Northern California. Of course, many of you know that Tule Lake eventually became very notorious for becoming a segregation center. So this is earlier on, before that happened. Here we have a Mary Knoll, the Catholic Church in Minidoka. And I mentioned that, there are very few people who stood up and defended Japanese Americans when the exclusion order happened. But of those who actually did, the very few who did, a large majority were religious leaders. So Reverend Tibisar, who was a Mary Knoll missionary, actually spent most of his time in Minidoka serving the needs of Japanese American Catholics there. This is, self-care and comfort and resilience also involves the creation of things that reflect that resilience. This is a poem, this is actually a psalm. This is Psalm, I think it's 121. it's, you know, the one that says, I look up to the hills, where does my help come from? My help comes from heaven, et cetera, et cetera. Reverend Masahiko Wada was a Japanese Buddhist missionary who not, I'm sorry, Japanese Baptist missionary, very big difference. A Japanese Baptist missionary, Christian missionary who came from Japan, and helped found churches in the US. And while Christian ministers very rarely were picked up by the FBI, he was, because he was related to a lot of sort of higher ranked military officials in Japan. So he was picked up by the FBI, separated from his family, and incarcerated at Santa Fe internment camp in New Mexico before being reunited from his family. This is another item that we have in the Japanese American National Museum collection. And incidentally, thanks to COVID, I have not been physically at the museum since I think March 7th. So I've been relying on my incredible collections colleagues to look for artifacts for me as I've been doing research. But this is another item that we have from one of the internment camps in New Mexico that talks about, you know, it talks about the ukiyo, the sort of floating world, and hearing the voice of my father even in my dreams. And it's an item in that shape. The obelisk shape is intended as a memorial object or as an object of remembrance, but a lot of these were made, as you can tell in this cabinet, there are multiple ones like this. They were made to remember this, to commemorate this moment, as difficult as it was, and to have an object that they could look back on to remember that this had happened. So along with Reverend Tibizar, who the Maryknoll, another instance of care and reaching out and, you know, aid and healing that happened at Minidoka was Reverend Emery Andrews, who had been the English-speaking pastor of the Japanese Baptist Church in Seattle, who basically lost his entire congregation. And I interviewed his son last year, and Brooks, the son, told me that basically when his father went into the congregation, or into the church sanctuary the day after the exclusion order had been issued in the Seattle area, it was entirely empty. And he decided that he could not abandon his flock. So he uprooted his entire family, his wife, his children. Brooks was about 5 at the time, and moved to Twin Falls, Idaho, the closest town to Minidoka. And this what they called the blue box, was this van that he had that he used to drive, we think 65 round trips between Seattle and Minidoka, to bring things back for congregants, to take things for congregants, to transport people. And he basically dedicated his entire, you know, the 3 years while his congregants were at Minidoka, he was there with them. Now, not there, and there were other Christian ministers as well as Buddhist priests who were not Japanese, who also did the same thing, who basically made it their ministry during the war years to serve the needs of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated. Another really important function of religion in terms of healing in the camps was, of course, to be a way of dealing with death. In addition to a higher rate of infant mortality, and also higher, sort of a higher rate of middle-age mortality, you see a spike in the death of sort of single men who were a little younger than would have been expected to die. You also just have, you know, people who had naturally reached the end of their life, illnesses, and so you have funerals, and actually these funeral wreaths. What's incredible about these, most of these are actually made out of paper. These are flowers made out of paper. And we even have video footage or film footage in the museum collection of women gathered around a table folding these flowers so that they can make these funeral wreaths, because they don't have access to fresh flowers. But you know, one other thing I'll add is that in Japanese culture, in Japan itself, caring for the dead is I don't even know how to emphasize how important this is. My mother's Japanese and I grew up in Japan, and my mother's already paid the family temple so that when she dies, her urn will be placed in the columbarium so that the priest will come and care for it, because she doesn't trust her daughter to actually go home often enough to, have these important rites done. I mean, it is to leave a dead person without caring for them is to leave them basically a wandering soul forever. And so even in a setting like this, even in the instability of this, making sure that the family of the dead one knew that their loved one was being cared for, that the proper rites were conducted, and that they were able to say their proper farewells is very important. Now and then here's another example. This one is from Heart Mountain as well. So you can see this is um, despite the bare surroundings, this was very important to have. And the image I used on my cover of my presentation is another really important part of this, the important role of religion and spirituality when it comes to um, death is, of course, the large number of Japanese Americans who served in the military and ended up dying. Now, I picked this painting by the artist Henry Sugimoto because it's an interesting combination of two religious rituals that are both about comfort. The woman in the foreground is holding up what's known as a sennin bari. What it is a piece of cloth that usually has a tiger drawn on it that is sent around to the women of the community, and each one stitches a red stitch with thread. And this is considered a good luck protection talisman that is given to the soldier. And throughout the Japanese American camps, the Japanese American soldiers who fought in the 442, 100th, or served with the MIS were often given these sennin bari by their mothers, and whether they were Buddhist or Christian or had other religious affiliations. And because Henry Sugimoto himself is a Christian, which is why you see the crucifix as this, backdrop for the soldier. But even for a Christian mother, the important religious significance of a sennin bari as something that might protect her son is really provocative and profound in this. Now, I want to very quickly go through, obviously soldiers, of course, often die. And so these camp settings continue to be an important place of remembrance, of grief, of proper rituals. So this is a Christian one. Here we have a Buddhist funeral. And lastly, the other really important way that that mourning and healing were sort of carried out in these sites of injustice was through the creation of monuments, of memorials. And these were done while people were actually there. The earliest one at Manzanar in Eastern California was built in the first year it was there in 1943 as a way to memorialize those that people knew they were going to lose. Babies had been lost, the elderly had started to die, and there were Buddhist priests who felt that it was very important to have a physical manifestation of remembering these people. This also continued at Rower in Arkansas. This is the Rower Monument, which was also built during while Rower existed. But the final one I want to end with is this one, because this is at Amachi. And this, so the monument is the one in the foreground, and then you have these 4 panels in the background, these wooden panels, and the wooden panels are actually in the Japanese American National Museum exhibit Common Ground. They're stacked, so you don't see them as a wall panel, you see them as sort of a pile of lumber. But on the so on the right, the bigger font writing basically explains that this community is about to leave. They're leaving this monument as they're about to leave, but they wanted to make sure that they remembered those from the Amachi community who had been lost, and to leave a sort of physical permanent marker for them. And then on the smaller font is basically the names of every single person. The top panel is actually all of the soldiers. So in the bottom, their birthplace is listed as Beikoku or the US. And then following them, you have a long list of Issei who passed away. And this is their way of, on their departure, as their last sort of their last act, and finding a sense of closure is to do this act of remembrance and loss and grief. But that I think is a really important part of, the beginning of their healing process. So I think I'm over my time, so I'm going to stop there. And uh-oh, what's happening? I'm going to stop there and move things on to our next presenter, which is Jessica.
Thank you, Emily. And hi, everyone. Good evening, late afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Jessica Rubenacker, and I am the exhibits director at the Winglet Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience up in Seattle, and very excited to be here and to be able to share 2 public art projects that we completed over the summer after having closed the museum heading into lockdown earlier this year. But there are 2 public art installations that really center around that idea of community healing and resilience. So I'm going to share my screen. Please give me just a minute while I figure this out and do it correctly, hopefully. Okay. And okay, that should work. Can I get some thumbs up just to make sure everyone can see? Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So before I start sharing about the projects, I also wanted to share a bit about the museum and our neighborhood, for those of you who haven't been to the Wing. And made it to Seattle. So a little bit about the Wing is that we're one of the only museums in the country to focus on the broader Asian Pacific American experience. And it's important to note that we're located in the heart of Seattle's Chinatown International District, which includes Chinatown, Japantown, Little Saigon, Filipino town historically, and also historically a large African American community. And so it's really unique in having all of those ethnic enclaves adjacent to each other, and very much so way we focus on the Asian Pacific American experience. And on this slide, we have our historic building that we're housed in, which was built in 1910. And at that time is a hub for the Chinese American community. And we continue that tradition today to be a hub for the neighborhood. And the first project that I wanted to share about was the mural project that we completed this summer back in July. I really, before talking about that project, wanted to set the scene of how the pandemic has impacted, and just this year more broadly, all of the events that have happened this year has impacted our neighborhood. The Chinatown International District in Seattle started feeling and seeing the effects of the pandemic really early on, really even as early as our Lunar New Year event back in late January. We're already a vulnerable neighborhood due to gentrification, but we saw a large decrease in visitors to the neighborhood. Business was down, and then just generally, then with the news of the pandemic, there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, as discussed earlier this evening. So the neighborhood really suffered. And then come March, we closed the museum due to the lockdown. Fast forward a few months into May and June, during the time of civil unrest across the country, we ended up needing to board up the neighborhood. So some of the businesses had already been boarded throughout the closures of the pandemic, but really hundreds of businesses in the CID were boarded, including the museum. So you can see in the center photo, that's a photo of our building as it was boarded in June. But what there was this beautiful thing that happened after all of the businesses were boarded. There was this huge volunteer effort. Volunteer artists, volunteers from the community all came out and helped paint these hundreds of boards across the neighborhood, and really created this vibrancy and the sense of hope and messages of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. It was really beautiful to see and to watch. The museum, the Winglet Museum, we were a little late in the game. We wanted to step, as far as the mural goes, we wanted to step back and be really intentional with what we put on the exterior of our building. Now, at this time in July, we were closed to the public, and so we really saw this as an opportunity to reach our visitors through our exterior. And because we had over 3,000 square feet of board to cover, we realized we could make a huge impact with the statement that we were making on our with this mural on our boards. Now, normally we would go through a community-based process. That's how we develop our exhibits. But in this case, we really needed to act quickly. And so we used our staff as our community advisory committee, and we discussed the goals that we wanted to accomplish with this mural. And the things that really rose to the top were that we wanted to make sure we communicated that we believe in the Black Lives Matter movement and being in solidarity with the Black community. We also wanted the community in the neighborhood to know that we were there for them, even though our doors weren't open, that we were thinking of them, that we love them, that ultimately we were there for them. On that, similarly, we just wanted to make sure we were including prompts that included and encouraged folks to reflect, and also including educational components, resources, and kind of historical information for folks to reflect on. So we ended up working in collaboration with artist Moses Sun, and this is the mural that we ended up painting with Moses. So Moses had worked on the Black Lives Matter mural on Capitol Hill in Seattle, along with other BIPOC artists. And we were really lucky in this collaboration. Moses was open to the collaborative spirit of the wing, and really created this beautiful mural with our staff. We also have a lot of staff, a lot of artists on our staff, and I think some of them might be on the call here or joining us on the webinar, who actually helped paint this mural. And I would say that this was a really wonderful opportunity for our staff to come together. We hadn't seen each other in months. So to be able to come together safely, we wore our masks and socially distanced, and create something beautiful for the community. I think that was definitely a sense of healing and care for us. And creating something for the community made it that much more special. I wanted to include this image, which is an image of our Canton Alley portion of the mural. Canton Alley is a bit more of an intimate setting on the side of our building. And this is where a lot of people walk through that alley. And we wanted to highlight community leaders who have done this work in coalition building and working in solidarity, to show that a lot of work has been done, but also serve as a reminder that there's still a lot of work left to do. So there's more information about these leaders available on our website, and more information about the mural. And I'm hoping that my colleague Vivian Chan can share. I can't see the chats, but I bet she's on it. Thanks, Vivian. We have this really great video that our marketing team put together, an interview with Moses. And I think he does a really great job at reflecting on the process. And the video does a really great job of capturing how we painted 3,000 square feet of board. So I wanted to share this video with you all. It's about 3 minutes, and I hope this works. Let's see.
Hi, my name is Moses Sun. I am the lead artist on the Winglet Mural collaboration, and I've been a resident of Seattle for about 14 years now. And I'm really just happy to have had this opportunity to collaborate with the staff, the artists, and the volunteers. It's been phenomenal, unexpected, and in a lot of ways, the birth of my own kind of public art practice. From the very beginning, from when Jessica reached out to our first, I think it was a Zoom call, and everyone was on, but there was this bright light and a need to solve a problem that was bigger than the museum. It's about the community of the neighborhood. And so the challenge was just perfect for me, especially coming off of the Black Lives Matter mural, where that was the first time I had ever really painted in public, much less something on that scale. From the way that we selected the color, the baseline color being the indigo blue, and all the history and the intersections of every diaspora on Earth, from African, Asian, Latino, and European diasporas. So that intersection is really like something that excites me, and just to see the variety of people working here also, it was just like, wow, I haven't really seen this Seattle before. But to see this go from an idea, a concept, and a conversation to within 2 weeks, it become this, not even barrier, but just like a protective kind of vibe around the museum. But then also being able to have a conversation with the community by asking, where do you stand? And then us doing a kind of call and response. We stand, with Black Lives Matter. We stand for solidarity and community, and we love you. It gets people thinking, and it gets people realizing like their voice counts. What I hope about this period of time, with all the visual artists coming out and the appreciation the city has for them, like the citizens of Seattle, the metro area, of all over, I hope that continues throughout the rest of the history of Seattle. And it's institutions like the Winglet that will ensure that and enshrine that and make sure that we remember, because these times are something else. And I think the mural now is an experience for other people. So I'm just very thankful and grateful for the opportunity, and I just encourage anybody out there right now wondering what they should do during this time, do what you're really good at and do more of it, because that's what we need.
All right, I really love that quote, that last note that Moses made. His advice to all of us, you know, do what you're really good at and do more of it. So, so we did more public art. We did another public art installation. We took his advice, and I wanted to share this second project, the CID Love Letters project, that was tied to our resilience campaign earlier this year. So we ended up having to cancel our annual auction. And instead, we focused on this resilience campaign, messaging and content around the resilience of our community. And part of that was putting out a call for art, which built upon the call that came out of New York's Chinatown and the WOW Project that Adriel had mentioned earlier. And they put out a call to write love letters to Chinatowns across the country, letters of love and support. And we kind of expanded that to include art submissions as well. So we put out that call and received some really incredible artwork and really great letters too. And those are all currently available. This is a shot of our website, but you can visit our digital Winglet website and take a look at the submissions. Hopefully we can get a link in the chat for you. Then we took the two-dimensional artwork and installed it in Canton Alley, right next next to the mural. So we printed the two-dimensional artwork really large scale, and then we pasted it to the exterior of our building. And even as we were installing it, neighborhood residents who walk the alley every day were really excited to see new artwork on the exterior of the museum, and loved the hopeful messages that it brought. We also, apologies for this kind of blurry photo, but we also printed off some of the letters that were sent in and had them translated into Chinese. We stuffed them into one of the weekly grocery deliveries that we have in the neighborhood that serves over 500 people, many of whom are elders. We again wanted to share those messages of hope. And speaking of messages of hope and resilience, unfortunately, we had to close this week, close the exhibits to the public because of the spike in numbers. But we are able to keep our marketplace open during this time. But when we were open, October through November, we were reopened for about a month and a half, month and a week. We did hear from many community members that they were just excited to hear that we were open. Even if they themselves weren't able to visit us, they were just, happy that we were there for the community for the time that we were able to reopen. But we continue to offer virtual programming. We have our house party programming going on through the end of this week until tomorrow. So this evening and tomorrow. And we just opened a new art exhibition, Guilty Party, over the weekend right before we close, but we will have an artist talk on Saturday, December 12th. So I hope you all can join us for that. That is the end of my presentation. So I think it's now time for Q&A. I'll hand it back to Tricia.
Thank you, Jessica and Emily and Adriel. Such wonderful examples and diverse examples of this story. We have a few minutes for a couple questions, and then I'd like to, at the very end, turn it back over to Adriel just for his final thoughts or comments, if that's okay with him. A couple of things that came to mind when I was listening to you. Actually, one specifically for Emily. When you were talking about the specific traditions around death and rites and funerary traditions, and talking about your mom and how she is thinking, how have those customs been impacted by the pandemic? And are there workarounds? How's this changed?
So that's a very good question. I mean, I think in the US, for Japanese American communities here, a lot of the restrictions on funerals, affect them the way they do any other group of people. I know that in Japan, we actually had a family member pass away in the last month, and they had to do the funeral just with the immediate family. And my mother has bronchial issues, so she's not allowed to go. And I call her once a week and yell at her, basically, like I'm sure we all do with their parents now. And but in the Buddhist tradition in Japan, you have a wake, usually the day the person dies, or maybe the next day, because they're not people aren't embalmed, so you have to go through things quickly. Then you have the funeral, then they're cremated, then you take the cremated remains home with you, and they sort of hang out at home with you until what's called a shijukai, the 49th day, when you actually inter them in the family grave. So there's a lot of rituals that involve family and other people gathering around, even after the death, that I'm not sure what people are doing. They may have to just ask the priest to go do things on behalf of the family, and I will just keep calling my mother and telling her not to go. But it is one of these things that is, both whether it's an Irish Catholic funeral or a Japanese Buddhist funeral, funerals are social, right? Mm-hmm. It's these very public communal moments where we are able to sort of find closure through the grieving jointly. And when that is prevented, I mean, I think that itself causes a trauma. So I'm not sure, but yeah, it's definitely it just sort of adds greater hardship onto already difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right that even while we're greeting, these are community occasions. And I think, Jessica, what I thought was so interesting about your presentation was the way that you found a way to bring your community together in a safe way, and in a way that actually that it seemed like it really mattered to your community. There's so many lovely comments in the chat about the Mural Project and the Letter Project. We have one question that's very technical, but I think it's interesting. And a lot of people have like upvoted it. So clearly people are really interested in it. It's when you showed the photo of the artwork that you'd pasted on the walls outside, how long does that stay up? Does it naturally degrade, or do you plan on removing those at some point?
I should have mentioned, so that both the mural and the wheat pasted installation have since come down. I probably should have mentioned that. But with the wheat paste, it was all kind of an experiment because we hadn't ever applied anything to the brick of our building. We had done some testing just to make sure it wasn't going to damage our historic brick. But it stayed up for about a month and a half, like as soon as the Seattle rainy season set in. And it coincided with, maybe about a week after we reopened. We decided to take it down because the artwork was getting a little smudged. So it lasted about a month and a half. Yeah.
Great. And actually, I see now that you had already answered that in the chat, but thank you for giving a great answer. And I think that's I think we're all experimenting right now, whether it's in our professional lives or in our personal lives. I think we're all just experimenting with different ways of thinking and working and doing and connecting. Before I pass it back to Adriel for his final thoughts, I'm curious to think. I was struck by your three different perspectives in your presentations on care and sort of survival through these difficult times. And Adriel, you talked about the care package and the role of music and art and Tai Chi and yoga and these ways that we can take care of ourselves that I think we're all thinking a lot about. And Emily, you talked about the role of religion and religious institutions and traditions. And then Jessica, you talked about the role of art making and community art making. And I'm curious what you're individually doing to take care of yourselves right now. What are the things that you have been turning to as we've been surviving these last 8 months in this pandemic? And you can go, and anybody can speak first, whoever feels so moved.
I'll go quickly. I sort of have a rotating, I'll do what works until it stops working, and then I'll have a bad day and then find something new. But recently, because, I mentioned I grew up in Japan and I am used to having immediate access to Japanese food wherever I am. And it's been very hard. And I've been very good. I have not even gotten takeout. I'm just cooking at home and trying to be a good little, home, like I'm trying to do my bit to stop the spread by not contributing. And so I've been getting very creative about cooking. I went through a tempura week a couple weeks ago. I'm just trying, I really enjoy cooking anyway, but there are a lot of things I used to just get in an izakaya because why would you cook, like tempura at home? But I'm trying to sort of add to my food repertoire. And so anything that I miss eating, I look for a recipe and get the ingredients and see if I can recreate it. And that's sort of my current go-to thing, which will probably stop doing what it's doing and I'll have to find something else. But, at least it also keeps me fed. So that's good.
Jessica, how about you?
I similarly have relied on food for comfort during these hard times. I decided to go vegan earlier this year, right before the pandemic set in. And so I've had a lot of fun trying to veganize some of my favorite comfort foods. And that's been great. I also really like I've never took bubble baths before, like regularly. So I always I've been starting the week off, on Sundays, kicking off the week with just relaxing, put the phone away, just stay away from the news, just relax. those have been my go-to self-care things.
And Adriel, what have you been doing?
Yeah, I have a regular meditation practice that I've been working on for the last 5 years, and so that was really helpful. I'll share the playlist that I was sharing with my friends on election day, and so every time I felt like opening a news app, I instead just clicked on the playlist link. But it's very calm music, so enjoy. Yeah.
Great. Well, Adriel, I do want to have you have an opportunity to kind of offer us some final thoughts, but I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much to our presenters, really inspiring, and just I think at least good for my soul to listen to you all talk and just to hear about your work has been really wonderful. And I think the perfect thing as we go into the Thanksgiving holiday. So Adriel, I'll turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Tricia, and thank you everybody at Smithsonian Affiliations. It's always so wonderful to collaborate with folks and feel that kind of closeness, even though we're not all at the National Mall in DC right now. Thank you also everybody, whether you're representing an organization or are coming, as yourself. Just really appreciate us being able to continue to gather even after all these months of living in this way. I think the main thing that I want to just kind of like, just note is, and I think something that we heard from all the speakers today is the fact that this culture of care, oftentimes among Asian American organizations, Pacific Island organizations, and especially Asian Pacific American organizations, we're constantly wondering, thinking about what is it that kind of binds all these people from all these different cultures whose ancestors come from, like all these different parts of the world, what really binds us together. And something that I've been learning through the process of projects like the Care Package is that there are very particular tones of care that we express towards one another, as a form of cultural expression, as a form of community expression. I know that right now there have been a lot of narratives pushed by certain people around, to make sure that we don't forget geographically where this virus came from. And during this time, I find that being quite a stark contrast from the fact that when we think about care, we think about meditation, yoga, breath work, a lot of practices that come from Asian culture. Yet, as an Asian American researcher in the United States, it's oftentimes very difficult to find the cultural roots or the primary sources of where these come from. And so this continued history of erasure is something that I feel like I heard Emily and Jessica both speaking to, and something that we're working on as well at the APA Center. And so for those of you who also work at centers and organizations and institutions that serve Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and if you identify or not as Asian American Pacific Islander, I definitely encourage you to do the research, especially if you do have a practice. If you do yoga, do some research into where that comes from. That would deepen your practice. Same with however it is that you do meditation. I think inquiry into the types of practices that are helping you through each day. If you haven't done that yet, I very much encourage you to. I can only imagine that would strengthen your practice and help you and those around you. And so with that said, thank you everybody for joining us. I appreciate you, and have a beautiful rest of your week.